Well, welcome. This is the 65th episode of Women on Wealth. I'm Jelena Ogilvy. And the topic for today is around first-time authors. And there are so many individuals that would love to write a book and for one reason or another, never quite get to fulfill this dream. And since I am in the ending process of going through this myself, I thought this would be great time to introduce Jenn Grace, who's going to talk to us today about maybe some of these hurdles and ways that you can create a strategy around becoming a first-time author. So hi, Jenn.
Hi, Jelena. Thanks for having me. I can't believe you're at 65 episodes already. This is amazing.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, I can't believe you're finishing your book.
I would say that too, but no, I knew you would finish. So
Well, thank you. You and I have spent a lot of time on Zoom. So let me first introduce you to the audience. So Jenn, you are an award-winning author, nationally recognized speaker, and I love this, a savvy publishing strategist, and the founder of Publish Your Purpose, which is the acclaimed hybrid publishing company. And we're going to talk about hybrid in a little bit, that gives first-time authors the secrets to getting their books written, finding an eager audience, and marking their place in the publishing world. You are the author of 7 books. You have been featured in Forbes, Huffington Post, Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. And on a personal note, you live in Connecticut with your family. And like me, you love to ski and the outdoors.
Yes.
So welcome. And I know you have it in the background, but you did just publish your 7th book, which is called Publish Your Purpose.
Sure did.
And man, is there a lot of good nuggets in this thing.
That was my hope. That was my hope, which is why I called it a step-by-step guide, because I really wanted it to be step-by-step. So that way it's not just all fluff and meaningless information, but something that you can actually do something with.
Which I think for anyone that has researched on how to be a first-time author, there is a lot of fluff out there, and I know you're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Can you first, Jenn, talk about your background and how you became an author and why you created Publish Your Purpose?
Yes, I will do my best to create the abridged version. So my original, so not quite out of college, but like just a couple of years out of college, I was a marketing manager and had just a really poor experience working for an insurance company and loved my job, just did not like the work environment I was in. And so I left that job and I started a consulting business to basically reconcile the differences that I was experiencing in my previous position. And so that consulting work was really niche and really narrow. So when everyone's like, claim your niche, carve it, be as intentional as you can, mine was LGBTQ marketing and communications within financial services and insurance industries of Fortune companies. Okay. So I mean, like it was like real, like you could not get, I felt like you could not get any more niche and narrow than I was. However, I still had people, even though I was like, okay, I'm marketing and communications literally for financial services like that. And I was working with agents primarily. Okay. And no matter what, I would have like people in like consumer packaged goods type of things or manufacturers being like, hey, can you help me with this instead? And it's like, well, all the information applied. And so instead of moving my business into doing, manufacturing, all these other industries that I wasn't, wasn't really my superpower, I started writing my first 3 books. And so that was in 2012.
First 3.
Yes, the first 3. So that was in 2012. I wrote the first one, published it in 2013, wrote another one, published that in 2014, wrote another one, published that in 2015. So I had 3 years in a row where it was back to back to back books. And they were all exactly that niche topic. Like it was super, super niche and narrow. But what kept happening, and that was also because I had clients asking me. I had a lot of clients who were like, you're coming into the home office to do this training, but we would love, it's not as accessible because we have agents out in the field who we're not going to fly to the home office for this particular thing. So if you had a book, we can ship them out to all of our agents. And so that's kind of how it all started. And again, it was all marketing and communications, which has always kind of been what my wheelhouse is. And so because I had figured out how to publish my book, mind you, I cannot emphasize this enough. I had no idea what I was doing, like literally none. I made every possible mistake you could find with publishing my first book, that it was like tragically bad.
Because and then you're self-published.
Absolutely. I had no idea what I was doing. And then I did the second one. I'm like, okay, we're a little bit better. I got a better lay of the land. And then I went back and updated the first one, so it wasn't too bad looking. And then I did a third one. I was like, oh my God, I finally know what I'm doing by hiring the right people, understanding the process well enough. And so I had 3 under my belt. And then almost everyone I knew was like, how did you write and publish 3 books so quickly? And I'm like, I don't know. I just figured it out. And I didn't really have a concrete answer. I was like, I don't know. I just figured it out.
Yeah,
And
that sounds
after saying, it was wild because I'm like, this is not my expertise at all. But it quickly became it because I had a lot of people being like, hey, can we go out for lunch, or let me get you a drink or coffee or whatever it was, and just kind of explain to me what you did. And so I had that conversation so many times that in 2015, I was like, enough. I love everyone, but I'm tired of having these one-off conversations. Maybe there's something here that I can create. And so I asked my business coach at the time, and she's like, why don't you sell it before you create it? Like, just see if there's a market for whatever the thing is that you're thinking. And I was like, all right, let's try this. So
right.
I created it's now called Getting Started for Authors, which you were a part of. It's had many names over the years, but it started in February of 2015. And I had 7 people who all said yes. And I was like, listen, I have no idea what I'm going to do here. I know the vision, and I know where I want to get you, but I don't necessarily know how I'm going to deliver it. And I was like, so if you don't get what you wanted, I'll give you your money back. No big deal. And that was
Wow.
the start of it. And so that was in 2015. So that was kind of, and I was like, this is great. I'm doing this consulting. It requires me to fly places. I did very well doing that consulting work, but it
Yeah.
was exhausting and it required a lot of travel. And so I was like, well, this is my scalable thing. It's an online program. I can do it just myself. I don't need to have a big team. And then like a year in, I had a couple of people be like, I know that you're like teaching me how to do it, but can you just do it for me? And I
Yeah.
was like, well, that's not what my plan was. But then when I thought about it, I was like, oh my God, that is exactly what I need to be doing. And that's how PYP started in 2016.
That's amazing. Just like so many entrepreneurs, you just sort of kind of stumble on it and it grows and it evolves. And I know we'll talk about it at the end, but now you have a team and you have a number of authors that have successfully launched and published their book through Publish Your Purpose. So that's
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely stumbled into it though.
Yeah. So upon stumbling on this, what type of authors do you typically work with? Is there a common theme you're finding from what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is people who are motivated. I think that's probably the best word that kind of captures everybody. And it's motivated to just make a bigger difference, right? So
Okay.
there's a lot of people who want to write a book because it's for legacy purposes. And I think that's fantastic. And everyone, if you have a dream of publishing a book and putting your legacy in the form of a book to give to your family, grandkids, people in your community, I think that's fantastic. But that's not a big enough vision for it to make sense to work with us. Like, it's really someone who is just trying to, do better in the world, see that there's a better way in the world. And like, you're a great example of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Whether you want to admit it or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
Uh, so I think you're a good example of this, right? So you have what you do for a living, but what you do for a living is only accessible by there's limitations to our accessibility, right?
Yeah.
But then you add a podcast into the mix, or you have some kind of thought leadership that's an ongoing blog post, or you're a guest on other people's podcasts. So it's someone who's, has their own center of influence that does not have to even be big. It could be that you have a center of influence over your tiny town, but you want to get that information more broadly accessible to people. So to me, it's more about like that big picture impact, because I find it interesting that we live in an age where information is readily accessible in all directions, and yet it's not actually accessible.
Yes.
And I think books kind of make information feel more accessible because it's packaged in a different way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And from all of the authors that I've met along the way through the writing program and just in the groups, that is definitely a theme I can concur with. There are very few actually that went through the program that are in finance. So I think that's also probably important to explain, is that it doesn't have to be just for the financial industry.
Oh, yeah, not at all. That just happened to be and I don't even know how I fell into that, to be honest, because the
Yeah.
insurance company I was working for was not like a financial insurance. Like so it's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really like we have a lot of authors who've written about like diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot
Yes.
of people who are consultants, who are speakers, who are coaches. Those are definitely the top professions, I would say, or
Yeah.
that there's some element to their business that is somehow tied into that, because that's how we can see a greater return on our time and our monetary investment into something like this. Because, if you're just relying on the sale of the book alone, it's not gonna be enough. You got to be able to kind of monetize in different ways.
Yeah, as someone in finance, when you do the numbers, does get tough. But I think to your point, I mean, as an advisor, there are only so many clients you can work with. But the podcast, the book, if there's a larger outreach that you can touch, then I think that's great. So thank you. What about the hesitancies that you find on why individuals can't go through the process? I was also going to ask you about mistakes, and I think they're two separate questions. So maybe we should start with the hesitancies.
Yeah. Let's see. I feel like the biggest one is that there's an imposter that lives in all of us. I think that is the root problem with every author.
One imposter or several?
It could be a whole football team of imposters, I would imagine. Because it's interesting because I don't know, we have such brilliance in all of us. And when you're working with your clients, I'm sure they're like, I'm so happy I have her on my side, right? And yet at the same time, there is some imposter in you who says, I'm not good enough to write a book. No one cares what I have to say. No one's going to read this. Someone else already wrote it. There's all of these, it's like I think of like a tape that's stuck on rewind, like, showing my age here. Like, that's kind of what I like. It's just kind of like that loop where it's just going over and over again. And it's not even saying anything that is helpful or even real. But like, we have this like belief that we're not good enough. Like, there's a core belief in most of us that we're not good enough to do this thing. And the reality is that there's no reason that should stop us. And I don't know that I've worked with anyone, and it's been hundreds of people at this point. I don't think I've worked with anyone who has not had some sense of imposter syndrome. I think the question is, what level does it vary? Some people have just like a little bit and others have it to, it's almost like a crippling degree. And so how do we kind of navigate through that when we're like, I know I want to tell my story, and yet there's something in me that says I'm not good enough to tell it. So it's this very weird dynamic that I think almost everybody has, myself included. Even publishing this last book, which was number 7, same thing happens. It's like, you're not immune.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and I think that's the reason, and you can talk about it in a little bit. I think it's the reason that your groups are so effective. And I've lost count how many times I've told you and your team that I'm not a writer. I've never been a writer. I don't know why I'm here. So that's a great point. And what about some common mistakes? And I know we're going to kind of circle back on this in a little bit when we go through the process of publishing and editing, et cetera.
So I think that there's at least probably a dozen mistakes that are most common. But the first one that kind of popped in my mind was not hiring the right people from an editing standpoint or from a writing support standpoint, whether it's someone to help you get it written or to help you edit it. And if we think about a book, it is a representation of who we are. At the end of the day, our book is, sometimes people are like, oh, it's a glorified business card. It is more than a glorified business card. It is your thought leadership. It is your heart and soul. It is everything that you believe packaged in a book. And the last thing you want to do is put that in a book and then have somebody say, oh, wow, I expected more from her. Or, oh, I'm like actually surprised that she would put something out that looks like this. Nobody wants to hear that. And I think that there's this belief that it's like, you don't have to hire professionals. Like there's this conversation that kind of exists in these forums and kind of like dark places on the internet that are like, no, you shouldn't have to pay for an editor. And it's like, this is what editors do for a living. They deserve to be paid for their work. And so why would we say that they should have to work for you for free? And so because there's this misconception, a lot of times people are like, oh, I'll just, I'll ask this, retired elementary school teacher that's my neighbor to have them do it. And it's not to say that that person does not understand, the English language and whatever degree is necessary. But the problem is that they're still not a book editor. And so it's still not going to be the best reflection of you and your work. And so I think, to me, that's the thing that I think slows things down, because you could have the best message in the world, but if people can't get through the message because it's not written well, there's typos, there's anything, you're doing yourself a disservice. And then the part that precedes that is just not having a cover that's designed well, because if your cover sucks, no one's even going to pick up the book to see how poorly written it is. So it's kind of like they feed into each other. And so those two parts of the process, I think, are absolutely imperative to work with people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, and talk about mistakes. I think I've gone through all of them in one way or other, just despite all of the direction that you all gave me, because I did, as you know, go choose another editor at one point, and then I came back crying to you. And one of the things that happened was the book cover that they created for me was not at all even close to what I had hoped to accomplish.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, when you all created my book cover, you gave me three options, and the second one I saw, I was like, "That's it.
Mm-hmm.
No need to do anything further. That's exactly what I wanted." And so I just, it's such an important that's such an important piece of it in terms of what you just explained.
It
So
is, and you also there's the importance of the reader feeling connected to it, but then there's also you as the author. If you're not happy with
yeah,
what your cover looks like or how your book was edited, you're not going to have the confidence behind it to
yeah,
want to go out there and talk to people about it and get your message into the hands of more people. You'll be more, like ashamed or embarrassed by it, and that's the last thing you want to do after putting so much time and effort into this.
exactly. Yeah, I remember showing it to a couple of family members, and the response was, "What is this? I
Mm,
don't understand." And I was like, "That's a problem." So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that didn't happen with the one you guys created for
No,
me.
I think your cover looks awesome, and I cannot wait. I cannot wait for your
Yeah.
listenership and everyone around you to be able to hold it in their hands.
I know. Thank you. More to come. So
Yes.
so in your new book, you reference the mindset. We're talking about this a little bit already. The mindset is the foundation of this journey that you're creating. Can you describe why this is so important?
Yes. So my book is broken into three parts. It is mindset, writing, and publishing.
Mhm.
And when I originally had my vision for how this was going to look when I was done, I was like, all right, I want it to be short, digestible, sweet, really to the point, just the facts, ma'am, aiming for like 35,000 words, which is like a 150-page book. I had like a really clear, like, I can do this.
Yep.
And then it is 292 pages. So it is significantly larger than my intention was. And one of the things I was like, all right, well, I could just remove the mindset piece. And I was like, or, maybe I could just put the publishing somewhere different. And I'm like, there's no way to do this without having all of it together because I really did try. And I was like, all right, mindset, it's not that important. I'm like, no, Jen, mindset is the absolute foundation to all of this and getting people across the finish line. So
I
when
agree.
when I think about mindset, it is a number of things. It is primarily just knowing why you're doing this. Like at the base core level of everything, it is just knowing why you've decided to put your story into the form of a book. Because you could have a podcast. You could, be speaking around the world. You could be doing a lot of different things. It's still getting your message out there. But a book is just a completely different vehicle to do that. You don't have to do it in a book, right? Like that's an option. And so having those anchor points of knowing, all right, this is my purpose for the book. This is my vision for the book. This is why I'm doing the book. This is the support system I'll have around me. And really having this very intentional mindset internally, but the support system around you externally
Mhm.
is
Yep.
truly the key to getting this across the finish line. Because as you know, and maybe you have a story or two to share, that you have these moments where you're like, this is amazing. I am so happy I'm doing this. I love this. I cannot wait for this book to be in hands of people.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of that, you have those moments where you're like, why? Why am I torturing myself and doing this? Like what possessed me to decide this was a good idea? And when we have those moments of doubt and frustration where we're like, I don't know why I'm doing this, we can just go back to those original statements that we made of I'm doing this for this reason. My purpose for this book is this reason. My goal for this book is this reason. This is how I want to impact people. When we know what all those things are, when we have that moment where we want to burn it all to the ground, we don't have to because we're like, oh, that's right. Like, because sometimes it's people who, it's like little Julina. Like if you think about like little version of you, right? Like what could she have done with the information that your book has? A lot of times that is like a goal that's wrapped in for authors. So you can go back and be like, all right, what would she want or what would she need? And it's like, oh, I can't give up now because clearly there's people depending on me and waiting for this book to be in their hands. So like when we have those anchor points, it just makes all the difference in the world and it helps people stay on track with this project rather than just giving up at the first sign of some kind of conflict because there's plenty of it around during this process.
Yeah, you mentioned the anchor points, and you actually have multiple examples of how to do that, which I won't say them all now on the podcast so that they read your book. or maybe or maybe come and join your writing clinic. But the one for me was the day that you said, all right, now you need to go out and announce to someone that you're writing a book. And I remember thinking, I'm sorry, what?
I remember your resistance.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I was like, I don't need to do that now. Why don't I do that at the end?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and
Mhm.
that's a hard one. As silly as it sounds, I think I remember mumbling it to my husband. He's like, what did you just say? I was
Mhm.
like, no, nothing. So, and
Yeah.
even now it's still, I still have the hesitancy. So
Yeah.
I,
And I
I,
think you
I
always will.
agree that you should not have taken the mindset out. So, yeah.
Yeah, it did not work. It was offset not being all three parts. But even though it is 292 pages, it is written still very conversational. It is visually broken out, so it doesn't feel like this big tome of a book to have to read. So I was
Yeah.
very intentional about the graphics of it, so that way it felt still
Yes.
very accessible.
I know. I love the graphics. Again, you got to pick it up and read it if you want to take a look at it. And the other thing that you talk a lot about too is the target reader. And you mentioned this is one of the large mistakes that first-time authors can make.
Yes, there's a whole chapter on target readers because it's so important. If we don't know who we're writing this for, it is very easy to write it for the wrong person.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times, going back to kind of my consulting business where I was saying it was like really niche and narrow, it is hard to like put the flag in the sand to say this is who I am reaching. This is who my audience is. This is, who my clients are. But the reality is that you're like a beacon at that point. When you are so clear in who you're writing for or who you're working with, you become a beacon to them.
Mm.
And what it does, and this is, I feel like, never talked about enough from a marketing standpoint, we're always like, attract the right person, attract the right person. And so in this case, it's attract the right reader. But at the same time, we need to have the offset of you want to repel the wrong person just as much as you want to attract the right person.
Yeah.
And we as just humans have such an aversion to doing that. So the more clear we can say, this is who this book is for, the more, the more clear we can repel the people who aren't the right fit, right?
Yeah.
So money confident girls, that speaks volumes as to who you are writing this book for. Is it going to repel potentially someone who has a child that is a boy? Yeah, and that is also kind of in it. Is it to say that your information is applicable to pretty much anybody? But it's the packaging, it's the marketing, it's the stories that you share, it's the examples that you set, and it's the people that you want to be working with, because that's just really owning that space where you are. So I think it's just really important because if we write, people are like, oh, well, my book is for everybody. Your book is not for everybody. Like even my book is not for everybody. Can anyone who wants to has a vision for writing a book pick it up? Sure. But
Yeah.
really it's people who have a business around the topic that they want to write about. Like that's really who the book is written for. And so when you look at it, there's a chapter that's about business goals as well as professional goals. So
Mhm.
that way it's not, like if you don't have a business, a lot of my examples might not make sense.
Yep. And I remember I didn't have the title at the time, but creating the target reader for my book based on the conversation with my writing group at that time.
Mhm.
And I remember someone pointing out, well, you have a podcast that's for women. I was like, I do. So, but
Yeah.
it's again, as simple as it is, sometimes it's hard to get there on your own. And so that was a great part of the process for me.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got
And what about some suggestions when it comes to the actual writing process? I mean, this is the biggest time consuming piece of the entire process. So I don't know how you can narrow it down for us very quickly, but if you have some tips on it.
Yeah, I would say, and I hate, I want to say it, but at the same time, it feels too easy to just say, just start writing, right? Like, I think that is probably the biggest thing is to just start putting words on a page.
Mhm.
Will those be the right words? Probably not. Will they be written for the right person? Probably not. But at least it gets us in the act and the habit of sitting down and dedicating ourselves to getting into some kind of routine.
Yeah.
So there's an entire chapter about writing routines because
Yes.
I think writing routines are critical because at the end of the day, what we want to do is kind of rewire our brains to just think differently and also act differently. So if we can
Yeah.
just say, I am someone who likes to write in the morning. Great. Block out the time in the morning. Get your cup of coffee, your tea, whatever it is that you drink. go to a quiet place, go to a loud place, you know, like it's so interesting. Some people want to sit in like a busy train station with
Right.
like chaos in all directions and write, and other people need to be in complete and utter silence. That if they hear a bird chirp in the neighbor's yard, it's too much,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just different styles. So the more we can understand who we are, the more we can kind of just create this routine. So that way it just we are able to tap into that flow state that everyone, you know, talks about and covets, like being in a flow state. It is routines that help us get to that flow state.
Yeah, and I think it's such an interesting point that you do clarify that everyone has a completely different routine
Mhm.
and that it's just a question of finding it and making the time to do it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, your routine for this book could be a different routine for your next book, right? So, you know, in
oh boy.
exploring. Okay, so mark our words, episode 65. And then when you come back later, inevitably, and be like, I want to write another book, I'm gonna be like, I remember on episode 65, we discussed this.
Yeah.
But
No, but
like
you do bring up a point. A lot of individuals, the routine changed along the way.
Mhm.
And I think and mine did too. And you know, we're all busy and we're all working and you know, we have our priorities, whether it's work or family. So I think
Mhm.
that was a big piece of it was you all helping us making the time to find a way to make it fit. Right.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
me, it was a lot of nights and weekends. So yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and like for me, like my first books were very much the morning. That was kind of where I was at. And this book that just came out was very much the, you know, traveling, flying, and then at night, which
Yeah.
I'm not like at night, and that is not my witching hour, is the eve. Like that is not my time to be
No.
trying to do anything productive. But I was like, I don't have any other time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have no choice but to
I'm
make
gonna
it.
make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Glad you did.
Yep, me too. I'm thrilled that it's out.
Yeah. So another huge piece of this is the editing process. And can you talk a little bit about that, the importance of that?
Yeah, going back to kind of the mistakes conversation we were having, I think so often people think of editing and they think of commas, periods, capitalization. That's kind of like all that we're thinking about when it comes to editing. But the reality is that it's so much more. And what I will say is that if you're not a good writer, it is okay, right? So that is the beautiful thing about having editors, is that you don't have to be a good writer. And I would say it is probably a 50-50 among books that we publish, whether someone came to the table as a really good writer or not. Actually, it's probably more like 70-30,
Okay.
where the majority of people are not, they're not, you know, writing is not something that they're passionate about
Yeah.
or that they do for a living in any kind of intentional way. And it creates its own set of challenges. But if you can know that there's this whole support system here that is just ready and waiting to help you, you could provide a lump of absolute nonsense in a document that makes sense to you, but you are completely unable to cohesively explain that to somebody else. You can get an editor, which is called a developmental editor, and they can come in and they can move things around, they can restructure things, they can ask you prompts that help you kind of be able to kind of articulate your points even more clearly. Does it cost more money? Of course it does. Like the more help you need, the more money it's going to cost you by someone along the lines in this process. But if it's something that you're feeling like is the thing that's holding you back, because you're like, well, I'm not really, you know, I'm not a good editor, a good writer, or English isn't my first language, or any number of things that can kind of get in our way, there's absolutely an editor who can kind of help in that process. So I always just, you know, tell people is like, do the best that you can. Cause typically that's what the editors will say. Like, what is your best in your final? Your
Mhm.
best still might not be someone else's, but it doesn't matter because you can get the right support systems and the right people to kind of help you along the way. So once you kind of get all of that figured out and you have the big picture figured out, the story is written in a way that makes sense for people,
Yep.
then you can move into the line edit, which is the punctuation, the grammar, and the things like that. And then there's still proofreading that has to happen. So there's 3 different people
Yes.
along the way that have to help support this book. And that's why it's such a detriment when someone's like, oh, I'll just have my retired elementary school teacher, you know, go through it. And it's like they might be cleaning up the copy, like the sentence structure, but the story
Exactly.
might be a complete disaster still.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I went through all 3 of the processes and it is again as kind of learning as I go, it is amazing to see the nuances and the differences between the 3. So
Yeah.
so you're kind of leading into the next question, which is you know, there's so many options for anyone that has researched how to be a first-time author. The first thing that they notice is, wow, there are so many options on how to publish.
Mhm.
Can you talk about the different options because you're a hybrid publisher. So can you also talk, I think not as many are familiar with that term.
Yeah, my hope is that will change soon, which is already kind of starting to change because traditional publishing is just a dying business model. So I can kind of share kind of like what the options are. So
Yeah,
typically when someone's like, I want to publish a book, two options kind of appear. It is going to New York City and publishing with one of the big ones, which are all merging and consolidating. So that's a whole other bit of a messiness right now.
yeah,
But it's like the Penguin Random Houses, the Simon and Schusters. It's that type of company. Then the other option is just doing it yourself.
yeah.
And so, which is self-publishing. And that is a very wide gap in between those two options. And I think that that's where a lot of people get defeated because they're like, wow, I don't have the skill set, the wherewithal, just the blatant ability to do this on my own.
Yeah.
And I don't have the access to working with a New York publisher. And it's not to say they're all based in New York, but that's where they were all kind of like based at one time.
Yep.
And for them, what they care about, it's a numbers game, right? Like what they want is for you to sell books for them. And
Sure.
so if you don't have a big audience or a big platform of some kind, they don't care. They don't care how important your message is because they need to make money because that's their business model. And it's not even to say that there's anything wrong with it. It's just a different business model. And so you have these two extremes. And then there's hybrid publishing, independent publishing, all kinds of just different things in the middle. There's vanity presses, which I have a whole chapter about of, staying away from scams and avoiding people who are predatory. But hybrid publishing is really kind of the best of both worlds, in my opinion, where it is the service, it's the expertise, it's people who understand the industry, who know how to help market your book, are intentional about reaching your reader, but you still maintain the control and the ownership and your rights and everything as if you were doing it on your own. So
Exactly.
it really is kind of in my opinion, it's really a good marriage. I think the challenge that we have as a publisher is that you do get final say. So there are times where your final opinion is in complete conflict with mine. And I'm like, okay, well, this is our business model, is that the author gets the final say, even if I don't think it is going to be in your best interest, right? And that hasn't happened with you. But
Okay, good.
but you would have known because we'd have had to have like a come to Jesus moment, which
Yeah.
I've had to have a few conversations with authors where it is a full-blown come to Jesus, where it's like, there was one in particular where it was like, I cannot publish this book as it currently stands. I know that this is your vision. I know that this is what you want to do. However, number one, it's going to be a poor reflection of me and my business and my brand. And two, it's not going to sell. And so I was like, you can proceed doing it this way. We're just going to quietly remove PYP as your publisher. We will still support you. We'll still do everything we would normally do. But for optics reasons, no one will know who's behind the scenes at this point. And
Okay.
that scared the author to a degree that they were like, no, let's reconfigure and recalibrate.
Okay.
And the reason is that, like I'm not going to die on any of these hills. Like if you want to do it a certain way, as long as it's following best practices, I fully support you.
Yeah.
And most of the time that's what it works out as. And that's kind of what you want from a publisher. A relationship with a publisher is someone who is going to go in alignment with what makes sense for you and your book and your business and your brand and your vision.
Sure.
Not what I think is going to be best in my best interest.
Right. But also know that there's integrity behind it and ethical standards, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little bit tricky, but so that's kind of the landscape of traditional, hybrid, and then self-publishing.
Yeah.
And then, like it's all about finding what makes sense for you as an author. And, hybrid won't make sense for everyone. Traditional doesn't make sense for everyone, neither does self-publishing. So that's why I have a whole part 3 is all about publishing that helps you just think about the right questions to ask. Like, what do you want? And then that way you can make an educated and informed and empowered decision to pursue whatever the thing that makes most sense for you.
I agree. I can't imagine decades from now that most authors wouldn't be going down this avenue, right? In my opinion, it just offers so much more flexibility than sort of the rigid two ends of it. I would never do this on my own, ever, 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 ever. So I think that's I think you're going to be one of the leaders on this. So this is fantastic.
I hope so. And AI is a big kind of leading force of all of this too. Like AI is like really changing how publishing is operating. And I really think, because it's definitely, hybrid publishing has been the fastest growing section for a decade at this point. Like, PYP is 8 years old. It started like a couple years before us. And I think it's going to, because it's just it's a very rigid business model with the New York publishing houses.
Right.
And they can't adapt on the fly. They can't modify their practices to AI and what AI is doing. And authors are like, why am I going to go work with this corporate beast when there's all of these like smaller businesses that I can work with instead? Like that's kind of how I usually describe it to people. It's like, the traditional publishing are the corporate entities that they care about bottom line profit, not necessarily who they're working with. That's the best way to describe it.
Exactly. And I guess on the topic of AI really quickly, can you share, I know you get this question all the time from authors. Can I use AI?
Yeah,
How do you respond?
It is a minefield right now of lawsuits in every possible direction you could imagine. And it's going to be a while, I think, before there's any case law that specifically says what you can and can't do with AI. And at the same time, AI is not going anywhere. Like it is here to stay. This is a train that is moving at a speed in which is not stoppable. And so I think it's a matter of finding what feels ethical, what's operating with integrity, what is right. And so for us as a company, it is a very clear no. Flat out, there's just no, we're not accepting any manuscripts that have anything that's AI generated in them, which has upset a number of people that I've had conversations with. I'm like, I'm not putting my integrity on the line for you decided to take a shortcut in this process. Now, with that being said, that is the content in the book itself. That is the copywritten material, because the problem with AI is that we don't know the source.
Exactly.
So, there's a number of authors that have, there's one author, it's tragic that she's written 70 books and someone scanned all 70 of hers into an AI machine. And so somebody can go in and say, write me a book in the voice of so-and-so and just spit out a new book by her.
Wow.
And she cannot stop it. Like, so that's one of the lawsuits. Again, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And so it's just not operating with ethics because there's no proper sourcing. And so I'm not touching that at all.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the marketing copy on your website, maybe what you want your book's description to look like, maybe you need, to come up with subheadings or to brainstorm what your title or subtitle might look like. There's dozens upon dozens of different ways. AI can be a supplement to what you're doing, but in terms of the content in the book itself, I would not go near it because it's just too risky right now. We don't really know what the repercussions are going to be for someone who violates that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I went into it twice. One was the subtitle of the book, was just to get ideas on how we could phrase it. And then the second was looking for search words and just making sure that I had all of that covered. So
yeah, I think AI is a great tool. It's a great supplement to a lot of things. And so as long as it's not generating the content, you're in great shape.
Yeah. And so thank you. That's an important one that keeps coming up. So just a couple more questions. What are some common questions that a first-time author can ask a publisher? I remember the first time I talked to you, I was like, I don't even know what to ask.
I'm sure not alone. Most people don't. I would say maybe it's less important about like what you ask, but just knowing that you can ask questions. Because I think the challenge is that there's this baked in hierarchy where like I'm the publisher, you are the author, which somehow means that I am better than you. You are beholden to me. What I say goes. If I say the agreement looks like this, the agreement looks like this, and there's absolutely no equity in between. That is the perception, but that is not the reality. So I think it's the corporate motherships in New York who have created that perception, because that is the case there. Like you have zero, there's no negotiation room, there's no bargaining power, there's nothing. Yeah. But when it comes to hybrid publishers or even self-publishing service providers, so there's people who will work with a company that can help kind of coordinate different moving pieces and parts. It won't be the entirety of what you need, but it'll be, 70% of what you need potentially.
Yep.
And so I think just knowing that you can ask questions is the most important takeaway, because when we think about the relationship and what's going to feel fair and right and equitable, you want to know what type of control you get in the process, right? You want to know who the copyright belongs to. You want to know, like, do you have to order any minimum amount of books in the process? Like there's a lot of, like, and there's a whole chapter on this too. Like there's a lot of these like little questions that I think a lot of times people just, because there's this hierarchy and there's this imbalance, it's like, I send you a publishing agreement and you don't look at it, you just sign it because you're grateful that you got someone who to take interest in you.
Right.
That is not how it should be at all. Like you should be empowered to be like, let me read through this publishing agreement and see is there anything that doesn't feel right, equitable, or fair? And then be able to have a conversation with the publisher to say, hey, I noticed that in this line you mention X, Y, or Z. Is that something that applies to all books? Like, so you can like really look at the fine print and ask clarifying questions, say, I don't understand what you mean by wholesale, right?
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you have a publisher that makes you feel like you're wrong for asking it, they're not going to be the right fit.
And I think one of the things that I've loved, you've enhanced your website over the last couple of years, and you have a ton of videos that just answer so many of these questions. And even along the way, every step, there was a mini video that I could go and watch. And it's just nice to kind of go through it again. I thought it was brilliant. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I guess the last big question is, in what have the authors that have come through Publish Your Purpose, can you talk a little bit about some of the success they've had? Or I don't know if you know off the top of your head how many books you've published or.
Yeah, I feel like I should know this exact number, but there's so many in process right now that we're right around 160. I think it's somewhere between 160 and 170 is my best estimate at this point. And that's just published books. That's not people who've gone through our writing programs or attended free workshops or any number of other ways that we've engaged with people.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting because I think everybody's goal is different. Everybody's, intention with what they're doing with their book is different. And like, I think about my memoir that came out in 2020 called House on Fire. And my goal with that book was I just need to get the story out. I need to just free myself from all the baggage of that. Like, it felt like the albatross, right? Like the proverbial albatross around your neck. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to publish my book because then I can also empathize and relate with our authors in a more meaningful way who are writing memoirs. But for that one, I'm like, I don't care if it sells. Like, I just need the person who's struggling and who has a similar story to just feel seen. And within like, it published the end of September. It was like the middle to end of November of the same year. And I had someone call me and cry for 3 hours.
Wow.
Saying like that they felt seen by that book. And so for me, for that one, I just ended up doing a bunch of like book clubs. Like, it ended up being like a really good book club book. And so that was kind of like what I did with that one. And for me, every bit of success happened immediately, where it's like, that was my only goal. And it still sells now. And I still have people reach out and they're like, oh my God, I read it. And this is what I took away, which is beautiful because I feel like my call to action for folks is like, if you read a book and you really love what the author did, email them and tell them that. Like, they're not like, I am not impossible to reach. Right. You are not impossible to reach. Like, just tell us that you read it and you appreciate it for whatever reason, because that goes such a long way.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like, we have some authors, it's wild. Like, we have some authors that order like 25,000 books at a time, like crazy numbers. And then we have other authors who maybe only order 25 books in the lifetime of their book, because maybe they're giving away the ebook or giving away an audiobook, or, so like, everyone's goals are so different. And I think that's why it's so powerful, is for us to like really know, what do we want to do with this? So like, with my book, I do a lot of like promotions and giveaways, like my new one anyway, because I'm like, I just want it to be accessible. I just want it to be in the hands of as many people as possible, because I know that there's going to be a certain percentage of people who read it who are going to need help, and they'll somehow enter our system in some particular way. But if it gives someone the tools and information they need to go off and do it on their own, go for it. Like, please, there are tons of people who have that willpower, the determination, the drive to just get out and do it on their own. And so it's kind of, it always goes back to like, how are you defining success? Because it's a metric that, some people are like, it has to be a New York Times bestseller. Sure. But at what cost, right? Like, how are we going to get there?
Absolutely. And I think my reason for the book is the same as yours, exact same reason. You're just more eloquent about how you describe it. But I mean, talking about your memoir, my mom wrote a book, and it was a memoir about, how she worked with my brother and his challenges. And it was something she just felt like she needed to get off her chest. And when people reach out to her, it makes her feel amazing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's a whole different purpose, but I think just as important. So
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
That's great. So last thing, we mentioned the writing workshops along the way. And that's one of the things that enticed me to work with your group, was because it wasn't really admitting off the front that I wanted to write a book. It was, let me try this writing workshop and see how it goes. So can you talk a little bit about some of the different opportunities you have there?
Yeah. So we have our writing program, which is called Getting Started for Authors, which we were talking before we went live. It was you and there was 4 people in the group, but you and 2 others in the group are all neck and neck in the finish line here of getting your books out, which is so awesome and also speaks to the camaraderie of having like other people who are kind of holding you accountable kind of throughout the process.
Completely agree. And it wasn't a straight line for any of us, by the way. It's just so funny we happened to end up at the same place.
It really is. It's kind of wild. I almost want to like draw out a diagram, like talking to each of you to figure out like where you went astray, just to like put them on top of each other as like an overlap. It's just uncanny, but really cool at the same time. And so like our writing program, it's a 6-month program, and the goal is to come into it with your idea and come out of it with a manuscript. And so there are some people who are capable of doing that, and there are others who take a different path, derail, need more time to get the writing done, and then kind of circle back around kind of to the publishing process. But it is not just the writing, it's the accountability, it's the mindset, it's understanding the publishing process, it's understanding what makes a good title and a subtitle. So that way, by the time that you're through this 6 months, you're empowered. Like that is my goal, is to just be empowered and have a draft. So if you do decide to try to get your book published traditionally, have at, right? Like that is your choice. But at least at that point, you'll be making an educated decision on which path makes the most sense. And then, you know, some people at the end of it are like, I'm going to go self-publish.
Yeah.
Great. You know, like I'm happy that we were part of that journey to help people get the writing done.
Right.
But inevitably, you know, I would say probably 50% of the people end up working with us, which is fantastic because now we have a relationship that we developed. We have so much information about what you're up to, what your goals are, that it just does make us a natural fit a lot of times. But it is not a requirement, and there's no, you know, there's no like feel bad, like, oh, I want to go, like, no, like we want you to be empowered regardless of how it happens.
No, I highly encourage it because again, you have that sense of independence. You're making the decisions. You're not telling us how to do it. It's here are all of your options. Here's what you need to be aware of. Here are the common mistakes, right? Everything you put in the book. But then it also, you gave us the resources, and then you gave us that foundation for coming up with a plan, right? And I'm laughing even now working with Chris on your team. You know, he's like, if you can have it back by X date, we'll be on track for launch date. And so it's my decision, right? If I come back late, it's my acknowledgement that we're not on track. And so it's not him saying you have to have this in, and making me feel, you know, like I'm torn between the day-to-day and the book. Anyway, so I think that's really important because people want to know that they can still, you know, live their lives, but at the same time, this is probably sitting in the back of their mind, like, will I ever have time for it? So
I think
that's what I found.
Yeah, and I think you captured that really well, because I think the key is making the book writing process and the publishing process fit into your life, because none of us have, well, I shouldn't say none of us, the majority of us do not have the ability to just go take a 3-month vacation and sabbatical from our jobs to actually get this done.
For sure.
Right. So like our 6-month program is intentionally built in to fit into your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would have no success at all if that were the case.
Yep. And by the way, I think if I was given that, I don't think I would be able to do it. I think I would find other reasons. So
it'd be too intense.
How can people find you?
I am at most social medias at Publish Your Purpose, which is also the name of the book, which, you know, I think is confusing in one way and not in another. So you can go to, you know, Amazon or your favorite bookstore, find the Publish Your Purpose book. Our website's Publish Your Purpose, and I am at Jenn with 2 N's, T Grace on pretty much all platforms. And anyone is welcome to reach out to me, and, you know, feel free to ask questions. I'm always answering things just because I want this information accessible.
Yeah, no, I agree. You came highly recommended from a mutual friend, and it's been fantastic. So I really appreciate all of your guidance and all of the information today. I have a feeling that this is going to be one that is listened to by many. So I appreciate it, Jenn.
I appreciate it. And I look forward to returning to the show to interview you about your book. So I'm going to put you on the spot for your listeners.
Oh yeah, I guess we have to do that next.
We do.
I'm still hesitant. This is crazy. So thank you. And thank you for doing that. That'll be the next upcoming one. So
yeah, it'll be great. Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Thank you.